To them, he was a ghost, a relic from a time they couldn't possibly comprehend, a man folded into the muted gray tapestry of the city. To them, he was just Arthur Jensen, the quiet man in the threadbare suit, a man whose presence was as unassuming as the gentle limp of his right leg. They saw his hands, callous and rough from a lifetime of labor as a groundskeeper, and they judged him. They saw his silence and mistook it for simplicity. They saw his humility and branded it as weakness. The air in the Sterling family's ballroom was thick with a scent of money and self-congratulation, a suffocating perfume of privilege. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto polished marble floors, and a murmur of polite, predatory conversation was punctuated by the clinking of champagne flutes. This was the world of Richard Sterling, the young man who was about to become Arthur's son-in-law. It was a world of sharp suits and sharper smiles, a world where a man's worth was measured in stock portfolios and summer homes. Arthur stood near a potted fern, a small island of stillness in a churning sea of wealth, and watched his daughter, Chloe. She was radiant, her laughter echoing unnaturally in the cavernous room, a sound both beautiful and alien to him. She was caught in the Sterling family's gravitational pull, mesmerized by their dazzling world, and a chasm was opening between her and the quiet life she had once shared with her father. Arthur felt it not as a fault in her, but as a tectonic shift in the world itself, a world he no longer recognized. He saw the way Richard's hand rested on her back, a gesture that was less affection and more ownership. He saw the way Richard's mother, Eleanor Sterling, appraised Chloe's dress with a look that was both approving and dismissive, as if she were a prize acquisition that would still require some polishing. He saw it all, and he said nothing. He just watched. The first blow, when it came, was casual, almost an afterthought. It was delivered by Richard's father, a portly man with a booming voice and eyes that never quite settled on you, always looking past you for someone more important. "So, Arthur," he began, mispronouncing his name as Arthur, "Chloe tells us you work with the city. Parks, is it? Keeping the grass tidy for us taxpayers. Commendable. Truly." The word commendable was laced with delicate poison, a condescending pat on the head for a simple man performing a simple duty. A few people nearby chuckled, a soft, cruel sound. Arthur merely nodded, his gaze unwavering. Yes, the Parks. He didn't elaborate. He didn't defend. He didn't need to. The quiet dignity in his response, the absolute lack of shame or apology, seemed to momentarily wrong-foot Mr. Sterling, who grunted and moved on, seeking a more responsive target for his casual cruelty. But the seed of disrespect had been planted. Throughout the evening, it was watered by 1,000 tiny slights. A waiter, instructed by Eleanor Sterling, bypassed Arthur with the champagne tray. A cousin of Richard's made a loud joke about needing to find a real man to open a stubborn bottle, glancing pointedly at Arthur's simple, unadorned frame. They were like a pack of jackals, nipping and circling, their arrogance of palpable force. They judged a man by his cover, by his worn shoes and his quiet demeanor, completely oblivious of the story written in the scars on his knuckles, in the slight, almost imperceptible tremor in his hand when he thought no one was looking, and in the faded ink of a tattoo just visible beneath the strap of his old watch, a fearsome, winged dagger, an insignia they could never hope to understand. To them, he was just an old man, a groundskeeper, a footnote in his daughter's glamorous new life. But what they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that they were standing in the presence of a ghost. They were mocking a man who had walked through the valleys of death and emerged, not unscathed, but unbroken. A man whose silence was not empty, but filled with the echoes of missions so secret they were never recorded, of comrades whose names were whispered only in the halls of the brave. They were dismissing a man who, in another life, had been known by another name, a name that was a legend in the darkest corners of the world. They were about to learn that Arthur Jensen was not just a quiet hero. He was the quietest of them all. Welcome to Jensen, where we honor the silent warriors and the untold stories of valor. If you believe that true strength lies not in what you boast, but in what you've overcome, be sure to subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Because today, we reveal a story of honor, disrespect, and the shocking truth that changes everything. Today, we tell the story of Sergeant Major Arthur Wraith Jensen. Arthur's life was a study in minimalism, a quiet symphony of routine and solitude. His small house on the edge of town was as unassuming as he was. The lawn was perfectly manicured, the hedges precisely trimmed, a testament to the discipline that was etched into his very soul. Inside, there were no medals on the wall, no framed commendations, no photographs of him in uniform. There was only a single picture on the mantelpiece, a faded photo of his late wife, her smile a warm, distant memory. His days were measured by the sun. He would rise before dawn, the old ache in his right hip a faithful companion, a dull throb that reminded him of fall, a story he told Chloe years ago, a story he told everyone, a lie. He would spend his days at the city park, tending the rose bushes with surgeon's care, his hands, which had once field-stripped a rifle in the black of night, now gently coaxing life from the soil. Children would play on the grass he cut, their laughter a world away from the sounds that haunted his sleep. He spoke little, but he saw everything. He knew the names of the regular dog walkers, the young couples who carved their initials into the old oak tree, the lonely old woman who fed the pigeons. They knew him as Arthur, the friendly, quiet groundskeeper, a simple man. Harmless, that was his camouflage. The Sterling family, by contrast, lived a life of loud, ostentatious decoration. Their mansion was a fortress of new money, a monument to their own perceived importance. Richard Sterling, the heir to this empire of concrete and steel, was a man who had never known a day of true hardship. His confidence was not earned, it was inherited. He saw Arthur's quiet humility not as a virtue, but as a deficiency. He loved Chloe, or so he believed, but he saw her father as a social liability, a rough edge to be smoothed over and, if possible, kept out of sight. "He's a nice enough old guy," Richard had told Chloe one night, his voice laced with the casual cruelty of the privileged. "But honestly, a groundskeeper? My father's partners are going to be at the wedding. Generals, senators. What am I supposed to say? Meet my father-in-law. He cuts the grass at the local park?" Chloe had defended her father, of course, her voice tight with a mixture of love and shame. "He's a good man, Richard. He raised me by himself. He worked hard." But her defense was weak, colored by her own desire to fit into this new, glittering world. She was the observer, the audience surrogate, caught between two worlds. She saw the condescension in the Sterling's eyes. She felt the sting of their veiled insults toward her father, and yet she was paralyzed, unable to bridge the gap, unaware that the gap was not one class, but of character. She saw her father as a simple man, because he had only ever shown her that side of himself. It was his greatest gift to her, his most profound act of love. He had built a wall between his past and her future, a wall of silence and simplicity, to protect her from the darkness he had known. He had given her a normal life, a life untouched by the screams and the gunfire, the ghosts that walked with him every single day. She didn't know that the limp wasn't from a fall, but from a piece of shrapnel taken in the Hindu Kush Mountains during a mission so classified it was officially denied ever happening. One, she didn't know that his quietness was a fortress built to contain memories that would shatter a lesser man. The stage for the drama was now set. The antagonists, secure in their arrogant ignorance, had chosen their target. The protagonist, the quiet hero, stood alone, his past a hidden fortress. And the observer, his daughter, watched with a troubled heart, sensing that something was deeply wrong, yet unable to name it. The air was charged with dramatic irony. We, the audience, know Arthur is more than he seems. We see the faded tattoo, the telltale totem of his hidden life. We feel the weight of his silence. The collision was inevitable. The disrespect was about to escalate, pushing the quiet hero toward a precipice he had long avoided. The world was about to learn that the most dangerous man is the one who has nothing left to prove. The inciting incident, the moment the unspoken tension crackled into open fire, was orchestrated by Richard Sterling himself. It was time for the toasts. A hush fell over the opulent ballroom as Richard, beaming, tapped a silver spoon against his crystal flute. He stood beside Chloe, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. He was the master of this universe, and he knew it. He began with practiced charm, thanking his parents, his friends, the caterers. Then his eyes found Arthur, who was standing quietly in the back, a silhouette against the shimmering curtains. A smirk played on Richard's lips. "And, of course," he said, his voice dripping with magnanimity, "I have to give a special thank you to my new father-in-law, Arthur." He paused, letting the name hang in the air, a foreign object in this room of power and influence. "Arthur, thank you. Thank you for your daughter, of course. But also, thank you for your civic-mindedness. Seriously, folks, this man keeps our city's parks looking pristine. Every morning, when I'm on my jog, breathing that fresh air, I'll think of you, Arthur. Thank you for your service." The words were a masterpiece of passive aggression, a public humiliation disguised as a compliment. He had reduced Arthur's life, his entire being, to the menial task of a janitor for the wealthy. The room, taking its cue from its host, erupted in a wave of polite, knowing laughter. It was the laughter of the powerful, the cruel, the ignorant. They saw a simple groundskeeper being put in his place, and they approved. Chloe's face flushed with a deep, painful red. She looked at her father, her eyes pleading with him to say something, to defend himself. But Arthur's expression remained unchanged. It was a mask of calm, of serene detachment. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, as if accepting a fact. That was his way. His dialogue was minimalist and stoic. He would not explain or defend himself. He endured the disrespect with a silent dignity that was more powerful than any retort. This public dismissal was the spark. The rising action began immediately, a cascade of escalating disrespect. The antagonists, emboldened by Arthur's passivity, now saw him as a target for their amusement. Eleanor Sterling, Richard's mother, glided over to him, her diamonds flashing. "Arthur," she said, her voice a silken weapon, "I do hope you're enjoying yourself. It must be quite a change from your usual evenings." She then did something so stunning in its condescension that it took a moment to register. She opened her small beaded purse and discreetly tried to press a folded $50 bill into his hand. "For your troubles," she whispered, as if it were a valet or a bathroom attendant. Arthur looked down at the money in her hand, then back up at her face. For the first time, a flicker of something cold and hard moved in his eyes. He didn't take the money. He simply kept his hands at his sides. "No, thank you," he said, his voice quiet but firm. The rejection, polite as it was, flustered her. She withdrew her hand, her face tightening with indignation. She was not used to being refused anything. The scene did not go unnoticed. A young waiter, an observer character who represented the audience's growing awareness, had been watching the exchange. He was a student, working to pay for his tuition, and he recognized true class when he saw it. It wasn't the diamonds or the suits. It was in the quiet old man's dignified refusal. The waiter made a point to approach Arthur moments later. "Sir," he said, his voice full of genuine respect, "can I get you a drink? On the house." Arthur looked at the young man, a flicker of warmth in his eyes. "Just water." "Thank you." The waiter nodded and hurried off, but not before casting a look of contempt at the Sterling family. This small act of kindness was a counterpoint to the relentless stream of insults. It highlighted the ignorance of the antagonist and reinforced Arthur's quiet honor. Meanwhile, Chloe was trapped in a nightmare. She was being paraded around, introduced to a procession of Richard's powerful friends, each introduction a fresh reminder of the chasm between her father's world and theirs. She could feel their eyes on her, their minds calculating, judging, and she could feel their pity, their unspoken condescension toward her humble origins. The narrative tension built rhythmically. Each act of disrespect was a beat in a drum that was growing steadily louder. The camera of our minds would perform a slow zoom on Arthur's hand, touching the worn challenge coin in his pocket, a totem, a physical link to his secret past. It was a coin he hadn't looked at in years, but his fingers knew every ridge, every star, every letter of the motto engraved upon it. Signed Perry. Without equal. 2. It was a motto of the most elite and secret unit in the United States military, a unit whose existence was only whispered about in the highest echelons of power. 2. A close-up shot on his other arm would reveal the tattoo again, just for a second as his sleeve shifted. The winged dagger, the symbol of the Combat Applications Group, known to the world, if it was known at all, as Delta Force. 2. 3. The dramatic irony was palpable. The audience knew a secret that the characters on screen did not. The Sterlings, in their smug ignorance, were playing with fire. They thought they were mocking a gardener. They had no idea they were poking a sleeping giant, a man who had commanded ghosts and hunted monsters in forgotten corners of the globe. The quiet hero was being pushed. His stoicism was not weakness. It was control, a lifetime of control. But even the strongest walls can crack under pressure. And the pressure was building, becoming unbearable. The room was a pressure cooker of arrogance and ignorance, and something was about to break. An unexpected arrival was imminent. A witness who held the key to Arthur's past, a man who would shatter the illusions of this gilded room and reveal the truth in a single dramatic moment. The power dynamic was about to shift, irrevocably and completely. The atmosphere in the Sterling's ballroom had become a suffocating blend of smug superiority and feigned politeness. The campaign of casual cruelty against Arthur had reached its peak. Mr. Sterling was now holding court, regaling a circle of sycophantic business associates with a story about a corporate takeover, his voice booming with the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a real battle in his life. He punctuated his tale by gesturing vaguely in Arthur's direction. "You see, it's all about recognizing weakness," he declared loudly, ensuring Arthur was within earshot. "In business, as in life, you identify the weak link and you exploit it. You have to be ruthless." The implication was clear, a final, public branding of Arthur as the designated weak link. Chloe, standing beside Richard, felt a tear of helpless anger trace a hot path down her cheek. She finally turned to Richard, her voice a desperate whisper. "Please make him stop. Can't you see what he's doing?" Richard, however, simply squeezed her arm a little too tightly. "Relax, darling. Dad's just being dad. Don't be so sensitive. It's how the world works." His dismissal of her pain, his casual acceptance of his father's cruelty, was the final confirmation of the chasm that had opened between them. It was in that moment of profound disillusionment that the room's dynamic began to fracture. It started not with a bang, but with a subtle shift in the air, a change in the ambient noise. The confident hum of conversation near the grand entrance faltered, replaced by a wave of sudden, respectful silence that began to ripple through the crowd. Heads turned. Conversations died mid-sentence. The imposing double doors of the ballroom had been opened by 2 members of the catering staff, their expressions a mixture of awe and intimidation. Standing in the doorway was a figure who commanded attention without demanding it. He was a man in his late 60s, ramrod straight in a perfectly tailored tuxedo. His face was a roadmap of command and experience. His silver hair was cut with military precision, and his eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept the room with an assessing gaze that seemed to miss nothing. But it wasn't just his presence that silenced the room. It was a constellation of miniature medals pinned discreetly to the lapel of his tuxedo, a galaxy of valor that spoke of a lifetime of service at the highest levels. The Sterlings, seeing a new high-status guest, immediately abandoned their conversation and surged forward, their faces wreathed in sycophantic smiles. "General Vance, what an unexpected honor," Mr. Sterling boomed, extending a hand. "We are so thrilled you could make it." General Marcus Vance, a 4-star general and a name whispered with reverence in the halls of the Pentagon and the White House, gave a curt, polite nod. He shook Mr. Sterling's hand briefly, his eyes already moving, scanning the room with a specific purpose. He was a witness, the vindicator, the high-ranking officer whose arrival signaled the climax of the narrative. "Sterling," the general said, his voice calm but resonant with an authority that made Mr. Sterling's booming seem hollow. "A lovely party." He exchanged a few more pleasantries, his gaze continuing its sweep of the room. He was looking for someone. The Sterlings, assuming he was looking for a senator or a CEO they had invited, began to point out other notable guests. "Senator Albright is over by the bar, General. Eleanor offered, and I believe CEO Thompson is." The general held up a hand, a simple gesture that immediately silenced her. "Thank you, Eleanor, but that's not who I'm looking for." His eyes finally settled on the back of the room, on the quiet, unassuming figure standing by the potted fern. A strange expression crossed the general's face, a mixture of disbelief, relief, and profound, overwhelming respect. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. They watched as the decorated, four-star general, a man who advised presidents, completely ignored the wealthy and the powerful, the senators and the CEOs, and began to walk across the marble floor. His steps were measured, deliberate. Each footfall echoed in the stunned silence. He walked directly toward the man they had all been mocking, the simple groundskeeper. He walked toward Arthur Jensen. He didn't slow down until he was standing directly in front of Arthur. The two men looked at each other, and in that shared gaze, a silent conversation passed between them, a conversation that spanned decades and continents, battlefields and quiet moments of shared grief. The crowd watched, bewildered. Chloe stared, her heart pounding in her chest. Richard and his parents looked on, their faces a comical mask of confusion. The general did not offer a handshake. What he did next was so shocking, so utterly contrary to the social order of this room, that it sent a seismic jolt through everyone present. General Marcus Vance, one of the most powerful military men in the world, straightened his back, clicked his heels together with an audible snap, and raised his hand in the sharpest, most reverent salute he had ever rendered. It was a salute of utter deference, a gesture of respect so profound it bordered on worship. He was saluting the quiet groundskeeper. Sergeant Major. The general's voice rang out, clear and strong, cutting through the silence like a blade. I thought that was you. It's been a long time. Arthur, for his part, did not return the salute. He was a civilian now. Instead, he simply gave a slow, solemn nod. Sir, he said, his voice low. Just watching. The room was a tableau of stunned disbelief. The antagonists were frozen, their mouths slightly agape. The power dynamic had not just shifted. It had been utterly demolished. The general turned to face the bewildered crowd, his gaze sweeping over the sea of shocked faces, finally landing on the Sterlings with a look of cold, undisguised contempt. His authoritative monologue was about to begin, a speech that would serve as the narrative's climax, revealing the protagonist's legendary, heroic past and shaming the antagonists into a silence from which they would not recover. You people have no idea, do you? General Vance began, his voice low and dangerous. You have no idea who you've been standing next to all night. The general's voice, though not loud, filled the cavernous ballroom, each word resonating with the weight of absolute authority. The silence was so profound it felt like a physical presence, a heavy blanket smothering all other sound. The air crackled with anticipation and dawning horror. The faces of the Sterling family had gone from confused to pale, a sickly white that stood in stark contrast to their expensive tans. Richard looked as if he'd been struck, his mouth hanging slightly open as he stared at the quiet old man, his future father-in-law, who was now being saluted by a four-star general. Chloe felt tears welling in her eyes, tears of confusion, of pride, of a deep, burgeoning shame for her own ignorance. You look at this man, General Vance continued, his hand gesturing toward Arthur, who stood with his characteristic stillness, and you see a groundskeeper. You see simple clothes. You see quiet humility. You judge him by your pathetic standards of wealth and influence. The general took a step forward, his gaze locking on to Mr. Sterling, who visibly flinched. Let me tell you what I see. The general's monologue began, the dramatic, reverent speech that formed the script's climax. It was a shot list of heroism, a litany of valor that would strip away the camouflage Arthur had worn for decades. I see Sergeant Major Arthur Jensen. I see a man who volunteered for the United States Army at the age of 18. I see a man who passed the most grueling selection process in the world to become a Green Beret. He paused, letting the weight of that title settle. 4, 5, but that was just the beginning. That wasn't enough for him. The general's eyes found Arthur's again, a flicker of shared memory passing between them. I see the man who was recruited into the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. You people wouldn't know it by that name. It's a unit that officially doesn't exist. 2, 3, a Tier 1 Special Mission Unit, tasked with the most dangerous, most critical, most secret missions our country has ever faced. 1-6 missions directed by the President himself. On-screen text would begin to populate the screen, listing Arthur's qualifications, his commendations, his classified missions, emphasizing the gravity of the reveal. Sergeant Major Arthur Jensen, U.S. Army Special Forces, 1st SFODD Delta Force. Classified operations. Redacted, redacted, redacted. You see a limp, the general said, his voice dropping to a more personal, more emotional tone. He probably told you he fell off a ladder. The truth is, he got that limp in the Tora Bora Mountains, dragging 3 wounded men, myself included, to safety under heavy enemy fire after our helicopter went down. He carried a man twice his size for 5 kilometers over rock and ice, all while laying down suppressive fire with a machine gun he'd taken from the enemy. He refused morphine so he could stay alert and get us out. I was a young captain then. I owe him my life. Reaction shots would cut through the monologue. A close-up on Chloe's face, tears streaming down her cheeks as she finally understood the depth of the father she never knew. A shot of Richard, his arrogance completely shattered, replaced by a look of sickening awe and self-loathing. A shot of Mr. and Mrs. Sterling, their faces a mass of utter humiliation. You see his callous hands. The general's voice grew harder. And you think of gardening. I see the hands that disarmed a dirty bomb in a European capital with less than a minute on the clock. The hands that performed emergency surgery on a teammate in the middle of a sandstorm. The hands that held a dying comrade, promising to see his family was taken care of, a promise he has kept silently and without recognition for the last 20 years. The camera would zoom in on the Warren Challenge coin Arthur's fingers had been tracing in his pocket. He carries a coin in his pocket, the general said, his voice thick with emotion. It's not currency. It's a totem. It bears the insignia of his unit, and its motto, Sign Parry, without equal. 2. It was given only to those who served in Operation Nightfall, a hostage rescue mission so audacious and so dangerous that most of the world still doesn't know happened. 6 hostages, all children, were being held by a terrorist cell. The official plan was to negotiate. That was the public story. The real plan was Arthur and his 5-man team. They went in against impossible odds and brought all 6 children home. They didn't lose a single man. The general pointed toward Arthur's arm. Under his watch is a tattoo, a winged dagger, the quiet symbol for the quiet professionals. 2, he probably never shows it. Men like this don't advertise. They don't boast. They serve. They sacrifice. And then they come home and they fade into the background, asking for nothing. Now, the general's voice was filled with righteous fury. He turned his full attention back to the Sterlings. This man, this simple groundskeeper, holds a Distinguished Service Cross, our nation's second highest award for valor for his actions in Tora Bora. 8, he holds 2 Silver Stars for gallantry in action. 7, he holds a Bronze Star with a V for valor. 9, he has been recommended for the Medal of Honor twice. But both times the missions were so classified that the recommendation had to be buried in a file that will never see the light of day. 10, he is a legend, a ghost, a man whose real name is spoken with reverence by a very small, very grateful circle of people who understand the true meaning of the words honor and sacrifice. The monologue reaches crescendo, the final, devastating blow. He isn't a sergeant major in the way of factory as a foreman, the general clarified, his voice sharp and precise, correcting their ignorance. A command sergeant major is the highest enlisted rank, a senior advisor to generals like me, a leader of soldiers responsible for their lives, their discipline, their welfare. 11-12, he has commanded more respect and wielded more real-world influence on a battlefield than you and your entire board of directors will ever comprehend. He didn't just serve. He led. He inspired. He saved. The general fell silent. The weight of his words hung in the air, heavy and irrefutable. The truth had been deployed like a weapon, and it had obliterated the false reality of the room. The quiet hero's identity was no longer a secret. His past, once a hidden fortress, now stood revealed, a towering monument to a life of extraordinary courage. The climax was complete. The revelation was absolute. Silence reigned. No one moved. No one spoke. The once boisterous ballroom was now a tomb of shame and shock. The narrative's climax had been delivered, a powerful monologue that completely recontextualized the protagonist and left the antagonist utterly and deservedly decimated. The falling action began in profound, ringing silence that followed General Vance's revelation. The words hung in the air, seemingly rearranging the very molecules of the room. The universe of the Sterling family had been turned inside out. Their world, built on the flimsy foundations of money and status, had been leveled by the quiet, unshakable truth of a life lived with honor. Mr. Sterling, who just moments before had been a bombastic captain of industry, now seemed small, shrunken. His face, once ruddy with self-satisfaction, was now a pasty, slack-jawed mask of disbelief and abject shame. He stared at Arthur, the man he had ridiculed, as if seeing him for the first time, not as a groundskeeper, but as a figure from a world of consequence and sacrifice, so profound it was beyond his comprehension. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to offer a pathetic, fumbling apology, but no words came out. What could he say? His currency, money, power, influence, was worthless here. Eleanor Sterling, who had tried to tip this man like a servant, looked physically ill. She had shrunk into herself, her diamonds and silk dress now looking like a cheap costume. She avoided eye contact with everyone, her gaze fixed on a point on the polished marble floor, as if hoping it might swallow her whole. They were shamed into a silence, so complete it was a form of annihilation. Richard Sterling was the most visibly shattered. His entire identity, his sense of superiority, had been predicated on a lie. The lie that he and his family were the center of a universe. He looked from the towering figure of General Vance to the quiet, stoic form of Arthur, and then to Chloe, whose face was a canvas of conflicting emotions, immense pride, devastating sorrow, and a dawning understanding of the true measure of a man. The smirk was gone, the condescending charm evaporated. In its place was the raw, ugly face of his own inadequacy. He, who had called Arthur a weak link, was now confronted by a man forged in fire, a man who represented a form of strength Richard couldn't even begin to understand. His own life, with its inherited wealth and manufactured challenges, seemed like a child's game in comparison. His humiliation was total and absolute. The camera of our narrative would pan across the faces of the other guests. Their expressions had shifted from scorn to shock, and now to something else. Awe. They looked at Arthur with new eyes. They saw the quiet dignity not as simplicity, but as profound strength. They saw the limp not as a sign of age, but as a badge of honor. They were witnesses to a moment of pure, unadulterated vindication. Arthur's honor, which had been assailed and ridiculed all evening, was now fully restored. It filled the room, a palpable force that dwarfed the ostentatious wealth that had previously defined the space. The observer, the young waiter, stood at the edge of the room, a single tear rolling down his cheek. He was not just watching a scene unfold. He was learning a life lesson, one he would carry with him forever. He was a surrogate for the audience, representing our collective sense of righteous vindication. But the hero of the story, Arthur Jensen, remained unchanged. He did not puff out his chest. He did not bask in the glory of this public revelation. The praise and the accolades made him visibly uncomfortable. He had spent a lifetime serving quietly, not seeking recognition. Tatina's goal was always the mission, not the medal. This was a different kind of battlefield, one he was not equipped for, nor desired beyond. He looked at General Vance, and there was a deep, weary sadness in his eyes. His cover was blown. His quiet life, the sanctuary he had so carefully constructed for himself and for his daughter, was now compromised. The ghosts he had tried to keep at bay had been summoned into the light. General Vance seemed to understand. He gave Arthur a brief, almost imperceptible nod of apology. He had not intended to do this, but the disrespect he had witnessed had forced his hand. He had offended the honor of one of his own, as he was bound by an unwritten code to do. The general turned and quietly walked toward the exit, his purpose fulfilled. He had delivered the truth and restored a hero's honor. There was nothing more to be said. His departure broke the spell that had held the room captive. The falling action was now moving toward its resolution. The party was, for all intents and purposes, over. The guests began to murmur among themselves, their voices low and hushed. their glances constantly returning to the quiet old man who had become the reluctant center of their universe. The shame of the antagonist was a tangible thing, a thick, cloying fog that filled the ballroom. Their social standing had been decimated in a matter of minutes, not by a corporate rival, but by the quiet dignity of a man they had deemed insignificant. The hero's honor was restored, not because he demanded it, but because it was an undeniable fact, a truth as solid and unyielding as the man himself. The resolution was not one of celebration, but of quiet reflection and profound change. The fallout from General Vance's revelations settled over the Sterling mansion like a fine, gray ash, burying the arrogance and frivolity of the evening. The hero, Arthur Jensen, had been vindicated, but he took no pleasure in it. This was not a victory he had sought. He had endured the humiliation with the same stoic patience with which he had endured everything else in his life. The subsequent awe and reverence were, to him, just as burdensome. He sought neither pity nor praise. He sought only peace. As the guests began to leave in hushed, awkward streams, their faces still etched with shock and newfound respect, Arthur looked for his daughter. He found Chloe standing alone, near the grand window, looking out into the night. Her body was racked with silent sobs. He walked over to her, his limp seeming more pronounced in the now emptying room. He placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture full of a lifetime of unspoken love. "It's all right, Chloe," he said, his voice as always quiet and calm. She turned and fell into his arms, clinging to him as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had just been turned upside down. "I didn't know," she wept, her voice muffled against his chest. "Daddy, I'm so sorry. I never knew." "That was the point," he whispered, stroking her hair. "I wanted you to have a normal life, a life away from all of that." It was the most he had ever said about his past, and in that simple sentence, she finally understood the true depth of his love for her. It wasn't just in the meals he cooked or the scraped knees he bandaged. It was in the silence. It was in the wall he had built to protect her from the darkness. His greatest act of heroism wasn't on a battlefield. It was in the quiet, humble life he had chosen to live for her. Across the room, Richard approached them, his face a mess of shame and regret. He stopped a few feet away, unable to meet Arthur's gaze. "Mr. Jensen? Sergeant Major, I don't know what to say," he stammered. "I was an arrogant fool. What I did, what my family did, it was unforgivable." Arthur looked at the young man, his expression unreadable. He saw not an enemy, but a boy who had been taught the wrong values, a boy who had mistaken privilege for strength. Arthur didn't offer forgiveness. He didn't offer condemnation. He simply offered a lesson. "A man's worth isn't what he has, son," Arthur said, his voice even. "It's in what he does when no one is looking." He then did what the quiet hero always does. He remained humble and quietly left. He looked at Chloe. "I think it's time for me to go." He gave her a final squeeze and turned, walking toward the exit, his slight limp the only sound in the vast, silent room. He didn't look back. He didn't wait for more apologies or accolades. He had faced a conflict. His honor had been restored, and now he was retreating back to quiet solitude that was his only true comfort. His exit was not dramatic. It was the quiet departure of a man who was, and always would be, just passing through. The narrative reflects on the lesson learned. As Arthur walked out into the cool night air, leaving the wreckage of the Sterling's world behind him, the story finds its moralistic conclusion. The Sterlings had learned a brutal lesson about judgment and humility. Their wealth and power had been shown to be hollow. Richard, in particular, was left with a choice: to continue down his father's path of arrogant ignorance, or to try and become a man worthy of the woman he claimed to love, a woman who was the daughter of a true hero. The final shot is of Arthur walking down the long, tree-lined driveway of the Sterling estate. He doesn't call a cab. He just walks, a solitary figure moving out of the bright lights of the mansion and into the peaceful darkness of the night. He is returning to his world, a world of quiet dignity and simple truths. The vindication was not for him. He never needed it. It was for everyone else. It was a reminder that heroes walk among us, unseen, unheard, asking for nothing. They are the quiet groundskeepers, the silent watchmen, the humble guardians of the code of honor that the loud, boastful world has all but forgotten. The wedding, if it happened, would be a very different affair. The balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The quiet father, once a source of embarrassment, was now a source of immense, intimidating pride. The shockwave of this revelation had indeed changed everything. The story of Arthur Jensen was a modern-day fable, a testament to the fact that true character is not measured by the noise you make, but by the quiet sacrifices you endure. The hero was vindicated, but more importantly, a vital lesson had been taught, a lesson about respect, honor, and the quiet heroes who live and walk among us, their greatness hidden in plain sight. The echo of Arthur's quiet footsteps fades into the night, leaving behind a silence filled with the weight of revelation. The grand ballroom of the Sterling estate, once a theater of arrogance, is now a cathedral of humility, consecrated by the spirit of a man who asked for nothing and gave everything. His departure was not an ending, but a beginning, the beginning of a new understanding for everyone he left behind. Chloe now sees her father not as a simple man to be protected, but as her protector, a silent giant whose shadow had shielded her from the harsh realities of the world. Her love, once simple and filial, is now deepened with profound, almost sacred reverence. She understands that the calloused hands that tended rose gardens were the same hands that had held the line between chaos and civilization. She understands that his silence was not an absence of words, but a presence of memories too heavy to speak. Her future with Richard is now an open question, a path she must navigate with this new, clarifying light. Can he become a man who understands the value of a life like her father's, or will he remain a hollow echo of his family's empty wealth? The choice is his, but the standard has been set, and it is a standard forged in the crucible of unimaginable sacrifice. Richard and his parents are left adrift in the wreckage of their own making. Their comfortable worldview, where worth is measured in dollars and legacy is printed on letterhead, has been shattered. They came face to face with a different kind of power, a power that doesn't need to announce itself, a power rooted in courage, integrity, and selfless service. They mocked a man for his humility, only to find that his humility was a source of an unshakable, terrifying strength. Their journey toward redemption, if they choose to take it, will be long and arduous. It will require them to unlearn a lifetime of arrogance and to learn, for the first time, the true meaning of respect. They must now live with the knowledge that in their own home, they were the small ones, the weak ones, the ones who failed the test of character. The story of Arthur Jensen, the Wraith, does not end here. It lives on. It lives on in the heart of the young waiter who witnessed the event, who will tell the story for years to come as a lesson in not judging a book by its cover. It lives on in the hushed conversations of the party guests, who will forever remember the night a 4-star general saluted a humble groundskeeper. Most importantly, it lives on in us, the viewers. Arthur's story is a powerful reminder that our world is full of quiet heroes. They are the veterans who walk among us, their battles hidden behind stoic eyes. They are the first responders, the nurses, the teachers, the ordinary people who carry extraordinary burdens without complaint and without any expectation of reward. They wear no crowns and seek no thrones. Their honor is not for sale. Their dignity is not a commodity. They are the bedrock of our society, the silent sentinels who uphold the values we claim to cherish. They serve quietly, not seeking recognition or accolades. Their only goal is to succeed in their mission and live to succeed again. This story asks us to look closer, to see past the superficial markers of success, and to recognize the quiet strength in the people around us, to listen to the silence and understand the stories it may hold, to honor the sacrifices of those who have served, not just with parades and holidays, but with our daily respect and our understanding. The ultimate lesson is this: honor is not something that can be given or taken away by the loud and the powerful. It is something forged in the heart, tested by fire, and carried with quiet dignity. The Arthur Jensens of the world do not need our validation, but we desperately need their example. So, we leave you with this question. Who are the quiet heroes in your life? How do you honor the unseen sacrifices that make your world a safer, better place? Tell us your stories in the comments below. Let's create a space to recognize the silent warriors who walk among us every day. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of humility and the true meaning of valor, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing this video. Join the Jensen community as we continue to bring you stories that matter, stories that inspire, and stories that prove that the most powerful voices are often the most quiet. Thank you for watching.